solve problems that involve angles. And to do that, we need to know how to solve problems that involve right triangles, because everything that has an angle in physics, we're going to break into a right triangle. The first part of knowing how to do right triangle geometry is knowing what the sides of the triangle are. So up here on the screen, we've already got our triangle. We've got a red side, we've got a green side, and we've got an orange side. We need to figure out what each of these sides are called. And we're going to do that based off of the angle itself. And you can see here in light blue, there's an angle. If you're not familiar with that, it's a Greek letter theta, which just stands for any angle that we want. It's like using x in algebra. So first we'll take a look at that red side. This red side, this bottom side, is right next to the angle. I know the orange one is next to the angle too, but we're just going to focus on the red one now. And this red one being right next to the angle is why we call this one the adjacent side. If you're not aware, adjacent just means next to. If we take a look at the green side is on the opposite side of the triangle from the angle, so that's where it gets its name of opposite. And the orange side, I know the orange side is also next to the angle, but we don't call that adjacent as well. We actually call this side the hypotenuse. And how do you know the difference between the adjacent side and the hypotenuse? Is because the hypotenuse is always the side that's opposite the 90-degree angle on your triangle. So the angle that's the side that is opposite that angle, that's always your hypotenuse, and it's always the longest side of your triangle. Now that we know what each of the sides are, we can take a look at the three trig functions that we use when we talk about right triangles. The first one is sine. The second one is cosine. And the third one is tangent. So those are our three trig functions. And what do they mean? These basically just talk about a ratio of the sides based off of the angle. For example, if this is a 30-degree angle, I know that if I divide my opposite side over my hypotenuse side, doesn't matter how long they are, the hypotenuse is always twice as big. So if this is a 30-degree angle, my hypotenuse is always twice as large as the opposite. And these sine, cosine, and tangents will know those things. You don't have to memorize those ratios. These trig functions know them for you when you plug them into your calculator. So what do they mean? Well, what we actually do is we take the sine of the angle, the cosine of the angle, and the tangent of the angle. We would be able to we would hit the tan button or sine button or cosine button and then plug in the angle into our calculators. And what do those equal? Well, for sine, it's the ratio of the opposite side divided by the hypotenuse. The cosine is equal to the adjacent side divided by the hypotenuse. And the tangent side is equal to the opposite over the adjacent. And if you ever have trouble remembering these, there's a little mnemonic device that we can use, which is called SO, Ka, and Toa. What do these mean? So, Ka, Toa, sine is opposite over hypotenuse, the cosine is the adjacent over the hypotenuse, and the tangent is the opposite over the adjacent. Now, how do we use this stuff? Typically, what we're doing is we're trying to solve for either the opposite or the adjacent side. We're usually, most often, going to use the sine or the cosine. So I'm going to show you algebraically how you would be able to solve for your opposite or the adjacent. It would work the same way if I was using sine or cosine. So if I've got the sine of my angle, and that's going to equal the opposite over the hypotenuse. If I want to solve for this opposite, which is most common, what we would be doing in physics, how would I solve for it? I would just have to multiply my hypotenuse to the other side. And algebraically, I would just type into my calculator the sine of the angle, whatever the angle is in the problem, multiplied by the hypotenuse, which again would probably be given in the problem, and that's going to equal whatever the opposite side is. And then I would have my opposite side. The most common mistake people have is when they have to solve for the angle itself. So I'm going to show you now how to do that. If we had to do that, let's say with tangent. So if I've got the tangent of my angle theta, and we know that's equal to the opposite over the adjacent side, how would I solve for the angle? What if I just wanted the angle? What if I knew the opposite side and knew the adjacent side and I really wanted the angle? What if we have a problem like that? A lot of people want to try and divide tangent out. Tangent isn't being multiplied. Tangent's like a plus or a minus or a multiply or a divide. It can't be divided or multiplied out. It's an actual mathematical operation. So what we do on your calculator, usually right around the tangent button, you'll see a little button that says tangent -1. And that's what we would do. To solve for our angle, we would hit that tangent -1 button. It's actually called inverse tangent. And the sine and cosine would have one as well, inverse sine and inverse cosine. We'd hit that little tangent with the -1 above it, and what we would do is we would plug in the opposite side over the adjacent side. So all I would have to do to solve for my angle is do the inverse tangent of my opposite divided by adjacent. And again, we would have the numbers for opposite, would have the number for adjacent, plug them into your calculator, and we're done. And in a nutshell, that's how we would do all the problems that have angles. We would have our triangle, make sure we know what our sides are, adjacent, opposite, and hypotenuse, figure out what it is that we want to solve for. If we're using hypotenuse and the opposite, it would be sine, adjacent, hypotenuse is cosine, opposite, and adjacent is tangent. If you don't remember, use SOHCAHTOA to help you remember which is which. And if we can solve for things algebraically, if we're trying to find this opposite side, we just have to multiply hypotenuse over. If we're solving for our angle, we use our inverse trig function, and that's how we would get it.